Hello, welcome to another episode of Varsity360. I'm Columbian sports editor Micah Rice, joined by Meg Wochnick. Meg, it's great to have you back on the show. And that means we're about to talk some high school football and some postseason high school football. It's exciting, isn't it?
I can't wait. Yeah, it's amazing how we're through the regular season, 9 weeks in, and looking ahead to week 10. So let's get after it.
All right. Well, we have a special show for you today. What we're going to do is, obviously, we're heading into week 10, the state preliminary round. Teams that have made it through to this point, their seasons are on the line when they play this weekend. But we're going to project if our local teams make it through to the first round of the state playoffs. And Meg, you had a golden ticket to be on the state seeding committee. Where would our local teams find themselves when it comes to being placed in the state tournament brackets, and what sort of road could they possibly be facing as they head into really the high stakes weeks of the season that memories are made of?
Absolutely. It's one thing when you know when your season is going to end, but that's the thing about the postseason is you don't know week to week when your season's going to end. Everyone's guaranteed 9 regular season games, but everybody's week to week once you hit week 10. So
that presents the caveat that we have to say the teams, as we forecast where they might end up in the state tournament proper, they have to win this weekend. There's a bunch of local teams. You may have heard us talk about them, the Camises, the Setons, the Centers, the Skyviews, that we're pretty confident in their matchup. But that's a caveat we have to have. And also there's some teams that are going to be playing this weekend that they'll go on the road. They'll have tough tasks, and we're not discounting them at all. We'd love to see some of those teams that are underdogs, shock the world and make it into the state playoffs. But we're going to pick a few that we feel like could have some pretty interesting seeding themes or plots headed into the state tournament. So, Meg, why don't you tell us, first of all, how are the state tournaments constructed? Right now, we've just finished the regular season. What happens once the regular season week 9 is over?
Yeah, so for the last few years now, all team sports statewide across for the WIAA state playoffs are determined by people. It's no longer teams drawn out of a hat like we've seen in the Renton headquarters before for state basketball. It's not done beforehand with brackets where you know where the teams are going to be based off your seeding and whatnot. So it's strictly done by humans, and that's kind of the really neat element. That's something a little bit more unique across nationwide for some of the other state associations. So for football, it is mostly head coaches. Some other sports have assistant coaches, administrators, and some other sports have folks like us who are members of the media who are responsible for projecting those round of 16 matchups. So that's where we are with football. Should we disclose some of our Clark County representatives?
Well, yeah, we want to know who's got the ears of the people making the pairings.
Yeah, so what's great is Clark County is represented all across the classifications for 4A through 1A. So the one and only Steve Kaiser, head coach at Skyview, is on the 4A committee. Evergreen coach Christian Swain headlines the 3A committee. Dave Hajek at Washougal is on the 2A committee, and John Lambert at Le Center is on the Class 1A committee. So those 4 gentlemen are a part of a group of men that get together, basically touch base the final couple of weeks of the regular season. They are not only responsible for the round of 16 seeding, but they also are responsible for the week 10 matchups, the matchups that you see going into Friday and Saturday. So it's kind of similar like the college football playoff, where toward the end of the season we kind of see those initial rankings. They get together over Zoom. That's the great part about technology, is they're not meeting at the Renton headquarters at the WIA to do this. They're strictly meeting over Zoom on a statewide basis and kind of hashing it out, seeing where teams land and fighting not only for their teams, but also for their league as far as why certain teams should be at the seed that they deserve. So that's kind of how the seeding process goes for these state playoff committees, especially for football.
Well, what's interesting is if you have the same group of people seeding the round of 16 that is also seeding the round of 32. Granted, they will reseed those teams after we know which teams survive week 10, but that means means we can read into a little bit in these Week 10 matchups what that seeding committee thinks of those teams.
Absolutely. The door is open just a little bit for people like us to have an entire episode devoted to where we think the seeds will lie come Sunday morning.
Well, let's get right into it with the 4A. And obviously, you've got Camas, you've got Skyview. Those two teams clashed in a really competitive game to end the regular season, with Camas coming out on top, and really a lower scoring game than we thought. And really, it was the first time Camas and that powerful offense had really been kind of held a bit in check since they played Roosevelt early in the season. So obviously, I think you're talking about Camas right now, 9-0, the unanimous number one ranked team in the Associated Press 4A rankings, and a Skyview team that, despite having a few losses and coming in second in their league, has got to be a team that has generated a lot of discussion among that seeding committee. Let's start with Camas. They play a Week 10 game against Stadium at home, a game that they're going to be prohibitive favorites in. So assuming Camas takes care of business this weekend, how do you think the seeding committee is going to treat the paper makers?
Yeah, absolutely. So if I could give a lock into all of this, I would give my lock to Camas as the number one overall seed. They are very well deserving of that. They have been the number one ranked team all throughout the Associated Press rankings. Strength of schedule is fantastic, and they've done everything to be deserving of that number one seed. You look at just defensively, this is a group that has only allowed 14 or more points just one time, and that was against Coeur d'Alene on the road up in North Idaho. And offensively, again, I've mentioned the play of Jake Davidson. He is up for State Player of the Year, the Gatorade State Player of the Year. There's only about 10 or 12 players statewide that get that nomination, and he will be one of them. And he has just had a fantastic season, 34 touchdowns, just 4 interceptions, and Camas is just playing fantastic ball, and I don't see how they can't be a number one seed at this point.
So obviously, for people that follow this closely like we do, we know that it's a big deal to be the number one seed as you work your way through the bracket. But for people who maybe are, tuning in or maybe didn't pay close attention, just what advantages come with being the number one seed in a 16-team bracket?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, you're at home through the state semifinals and home meeting in Clark County. So they will have home games guaranteed, assuming they take care of business for at least the next 3 weeks. We're talking the Week 10 game against Stadium on Friday night, followed by the first 2 rounds of the state playoffs. Once they get to the semifinals, then you're looking at a possible McKenzie Stadium. That is a venue that has been approved in the past. There's a number of issues that kind of go into, I shouldn't say issues, but there's a number of check marks that stadiums statewide have to have in order to be awarded a state semifinal site. But yes, being the number one seed can't get any sweeter than that. So Camas was a 3 last year, getting upset ultimately by Mount Si to end their season. But this is a team that has pretty much no intentions of ending their season early.
Right. Another team with no intentions of ending their season early is Skyview, and we've talked about Skyview and just that murderer's row of playoff quality opponents that they stacked their non-league schedule with. It allowed them to get, thrilling wins over statewide powers like Graham Kapowson. It allowed them to really see how they measured up against Oregon power like West Linn, and it allowed them to kind of learn some things about themselves when they dealt with a few injuries, specifically to starting quarterback Doogie Poindexter, who missed a couple of games in the middle of the season, and showed that when he's healthy, he really is a key cog in that offense, along with obviously the all-do-everything star that Gavin Packer is. But Skyview comes in with 3 losses on the year, but I think a track record that might be attractive, being that they have quality wins and no bad losses, really, that you would say, considering some of their injury situations. How do you think the seating committee is going to address Skyview should, of course, they take care of business against 6-3 Juanita on Saturday in Week 10.
Yeah, this is one of the more kind of intriguing teams in the 4A bracket. So this is not the only 3-loss team. Graham Kapowson is another one, and that's a team that Skyview came back to win in a fantastic game, 21-17 in the first couple weeks of the season after trailing 17 in the second half in that game. But you mentioned it, the strength of schedule is really going to be one of the selling points. And again, Steve Kaiser, not only is he going to vouch for his team, but he's going to vouch for Camas and just how good the 4A Greater St. Helens League team is. These are two teams that every year is going out and trying to find the best opponents possible for situations like this, for a deep postseason run. So if I was on the committee, I'm looking at a 9-11 seeding for Skyview. I think it would have to take a couple maybe monumental upsets this weekend for Skyview to rise up into the top 8 and get a home team, a home seed at Kiggins Bowl. I do think this is the last time we will see Skyview and head coach Steve Kaiser at home should they take care of business. But what would be really interesting if they were on the upper end of that 9-11 estimate, that 8-9 matchup, the winner of that gets the number 1 seed in the quarters.
And who's that number 1 seed again?
We all know it would be basically the same scenario that we saw, was it 9 years ago in 2015 when Camas and Skyview tangoed in the quarterfinals just 3 weeks after their regular season matchup, both of those wins going to Camas. So just keep that in the back of your mind going into Sunday. If they get that 8-9 game, they would be on the road. But, you know, that 8-9 game, it's a toss-up game. I mean, this is high school football. Yeah. Every game is a toss-up game at this point when you're talking about teenagers. But just something to keep in the back of your mind should they get that seed.
Oh, and we give it the storylines for us journalists. We love those ones. But you bring up two good points, I think. Number one is Skyview going on the road. That's something they've done in recent years. You look back to last year when they went on the road and ended up being the team in the Class 4A from Southwest Washington who advanced the farthest, going to the quarterfinals. You go back to even a little bit more distant, the last time that Skyview made the semifinals, that was largely going on the road when they went there with, I think that was the Brody Barnum team that made that run. So Skyview, they kind of have this history of being able to do that. But the other point I think you made that's really interesting is when you have a local coach on the seating committee, instead of trashing his rivals, often you'll see them pumping up their rivals. They want to make, in this case, Steve Kaiser or any other member from down here on the committee, they want to make the case that this area is as strong as they can possibly make that case to be, because that benefits their own seating.
Absolutely, and I know we'll talk about the 1As and the Trico when we get to that, because that's something that I do want to touch on, is just the strength of what we've seen from Trico football this year. But you're absolutely right. Last year, Skyview was basically a turnover away from advancing to the state semifinals, ultimately losing to Eastlake up in Sammamish in the state quarters. But you said it, this is a team that postseason-wise knows how to win on the road. Mm-hmm. So it wouldn't shock me, honestly, if they say they draw Moses Lake, and that's a 5-hour bus ride in the middle of Grant County. So this is a team that knows how to win and knows how to win the postseason, even if they're on the road and taking a long bus ride somewhere.
All right. Well, we should be very occupied with the 4As, I think, as long as the state playoffs are going in football. But you mentioned the 1As, and we're going to jump straight into the 1As because obviously if you follow high school football in Southwest Washington, you've heard us talk about Seton Catholic and La Center and just how good the Trico League has been with those two teams at the top, two of the best 1A programs in the state this year. They also clashed on week 9 with Seton Catholic, winning a very competitive game on the natural turf, in the rain, in hostile environments, and
that
in La
mud
Center.
Was beautiful, by the way.
That was some old school football there. But Seton, really the first time this year they were tested and they came through. They got kind of smacked early, but they rebounded and showed the heart of a champion to come back and win their first Trico League title. So Seton Catholic, undefeated. They're going to play either against College Place or Chelan. We won't know until after we've taped this episode, but they will be at home on Saturday. Assuming the Cougars take care of business, where is the seating committee going to put them, do you think?
Well, I mentioned a lock of Camas being number one. I also think across 1A, the lock is going to be Royal
Always.
At number one. Yeah, 11 state championships, all coming since 96. Obviously, the defending state champions from last year, a team that beat Seton Catholic at home in the state semifinals a year ago. But the other, basically, lock, Seton Catholic has locked up the number 2 seed, in my opinion. They have done everything in their powers outside of Royal to be that number 2 seed. And again, you mentioned what the benefits are of being the number 1 seed. The number 2 seed, same thing. You are at home, or basically the nearest at home. They're going to be playing their Week 10 game at Camas Saturday afternoon at 2 o'clock, not on the turf field at Seton Catholic School. But great part is you get to be pretty much in the proximity of where your school is located for the next few rounds. And again, this is something that is very unfamiliar for Seton Catholic. We talked about their rise last year, kind of coming, I don't want to say out of nowhere, but really climbing, getting that number 12 seed, having a couple upsets on the road to get to the state semifinals. So talking with the players and coaches post-game, getting that first Trico championship against a program that have been basically the kings of the Trico League for more or less for the past 20 years is basically that next part of that check mark and that stepping stone in the path of the season to where they ultimately want to be. So being that number 2 seed, I see where that is. As far as Le Center, where I see this, I think they lock in the number 3.
Really?
I really do.
Really?
I absolutely
Wow.
do. There is a chance they might get the 4, but I think, again, their body of work, how close, it was a 1-score game, 29-21 to Seton Catholic, and you look at the couple of teams that are right behind them. Cashmere at 8-1, Nooksack Valley 7-2, one of those losses to what I think is going to be the eventual 2A champions in Tumwater. And you look at an undefeated Life Christian team out of Tacoma that doesn't have really the resume and the schedule that maybe Le Center does. But I think if they're not the 3, I think they're going to be the 4. So again, how important is getting that top 4 seed? We talked about it. It's only a 12-team tournament for the next 2 years for Class 1A football. And we discussed this in prior episodes. That's because a couple of teams up north are not fielding varsity football this year. And so they're under that minimum number threshold. They need to have a 16-team tournament field. So if you're a top 4 seed, you get a first round bye and you're off at Big Al's playing bowling on that Friday night instead of out on the gridiron in a round of 16 game. But that is my prediction. And if it's a 2-3 game, that's a semifinal rematch, likely at McKenzie Stadium on Thanksgiving weekend. So That is my prediction. They get the 3 seed. Seton's the 2, and we're going to have another rematch, and I can't wait if that happens.
Yeah, that would be amazing, just because, we talked about in the lead up to this how we sort of thought it would be a pretty tough sell to take 2 teams from the same district and give them one of those coveted 4 first-round buys that are in the 12-team bracket. But I think Le Center really bolstered its case by playing so well against Seton and showing just that while Seton was the better team on that night, that gap isn't that big.
And something else that bolsters Le Center as well. So 2 weeks ago, Nooksack Valley was upset by Montesano. Montesano and Le Center played week 1, and that was Le Center taking it to him 35-7 on the road at Montesano. So again, that looks better as far as resume-wise. But again, the Trico League football from a statewide perspective doesn't get a whole lot of love. You look at the last 20 years. And before Seton Catholic's run to the semis, there's only one other Trico school that has made the state semifinals. And you want to guess what school that is?
I think they made it in back-to-back years, did they not?
3 times,
Yeah.
all under John Lambert,
Yep.
talking about the Le Center Wildcats. So when you talked about a respectability factor, that is what John Lambert is going to go into these meetings, if he hasn't already, to not only make a case for his team, but to showcase Seton Catholic and why Trico football is for real, and I think it is this year.
Well, and then you bring in the question of style points into the equation. Seton, like you said, I don't think they have to, they obviously have to win, but they don't have to win by a certain margin this weekend in their Week 10 game. It might behoove Le Center a little bit more to have a really good showing and impressive score against an Elma team that they're going to be favored pretty heavily against. But I think that enters the equation about putting up style points with a Le Center, a team in that situation, more than it would a Seton.
No, absolutely. And I look back to last year as a perfect example when Le Center drew an 8 seed, an undefeated Le Center team, and I thought that was a little low. And we were talking about style points. You know, this season, I think there's been a certain situations where Coach Lambert has said, you know, hey, let's maybe either keep on the gas a little bit or make the score a little bit more impressive. And the game that comes to mind is against Woodland, the eventual back-to-back 2A GSHL champs, where they're up 7-0 for a good portion of the game. It was 21-0 late. They added a late fourth quarter touchdown to make it 28-0. A 28-0 score against the eventual 2A GSHL champs looks a lot better than maybe a 14-0 or a 21-0 score. So, yeah, you talk about style points. I think they are favored very heavily against Elma, and Seton Catholic, whoever comes out of that tiebreaker game on Tuesday, will also be heavily favored at home Saturday afternoon. But I think both those teams have done enough in terms of that style points to get the top 3 seeds that they are so well deserving of.
Well, that will be interesting for sure. I love that theme and that potential for possibly 2 teams from the area to get those 2 of those 4 coveted bye seats. Let's move on to the 2As and a team that definitely is in style right now, and that would be the Woodland Beavers. Your back-to-back 2A Greater St. Helens League champion Woodland Beavers. The first time they've done that in program history since 2007, and obviously they wrapped that up with another colossal Week 9 tilt against previously unbeaten rival Ridgefield. This one was more of a defensive slugfest in the rain at the Beaver Stadium turf. Woodland ends up winning 14-7, just really showing how well that defense is playing to shut down a Spudders offense that really had put up some pretty good numbers throughout the 2A Greater St. Helens League season. Woodland goes in a 7-2 record, but on a 7-game winning streak after running the table in the 2A Greater St. Helens League. Woodland plays Cedar Crest in Week 10. If the Beavers take care of business, and Meg, you're on the seeding committee, what sort of argument are you making for Woodland?
Yeah, this is the more kind of intriguing state playoff seeds, I think, because Woodland basically is in the same scenario they were a year ago. Assuming they take care of business Friday night, they will have an 8-2 record, league champions. Same exact record as last year when they got the 9 seed and everyone was upset because they had to go to Clarkston, which felt like the other side of the world, traveling by bus to the east side of the state for a round of 16 game. But this is kind of what I'm thinking. Does the seeding committee reward the outright league champion that might not have as good of a record as another team in the league? And this is where Ridgefield comes into play. Ridgefield, up until last week, had a better record, better RPI, better strength of schedule as far as the computer seedings go. But Woodland was the eventual league champion, and that clash, second year in a row, those 2 teams tangoed in Week 9 for the league title. So I'm going to go out and say, yes, the seeding committee will reward the outright league champion. And I think Woodland might be in that 8-10 range. Wouldn't be surprised if they hit the road again, but it would be a pleasant surprise to see them host a round of 16 game, and it has been quite a long time since Woodland has done that. On the flip side, I see Ridgefield probably in that 10, 11, 12 range. If I have to be brutally honest, when it comes to the 2A GSHL top to bottom, this might be the weakest the league has been in maybe 15 years. We don't have that dominant run that we've seen from Hawkinson, where they won 7 straight league titles from 2014 to the fall 2021, or at the spring of 2021, where they just absolutely dominated everybody, including a pair of back-to-back state championships. Before that, Mark Morris was the kings of the league, and there was a couple of state quarterfinal runs. But there's just really no dominant team for the past couple years. And you're looking at the state seating committees. Right now, there's a couple of teams, Tumwater, Anacortes, Archbishop Murphy, which are in a class by themselves. And I feel like maybe you throw Franklin Pierce in there as well, and it's the rest of the 2A field. So don't be shocked if Ridgefield has a double-digit seed, but don't also be surprised if Woodland hits the road for the round of 16 as well.
Well, obviously, we bring up the caveat that for Ridgefield, first they have to take care of business Saturday against a good Fife team, a team that really, when you talk about comparable opponents, Fife had a lopsided win against Hawkinson earlier in the year, and then before losing to Woodland, the toughest clash that Ridgefield had in league play was against Hawkinson, only beating the Hawks by 3. But if you're talking about style points and just wanting to lift up your resume, I would say that the biggest cheerleaders for Ridgefield on Saturday against Fife might be the Woodland Beavers.
No, you're absolutely right. And should Ridgefield take care of business, it'll be the first time since 2021 that they get to the round of 16. And that year was they made it all the way to the state quarterfinals before falling to Squalicum up in Bellingham. So you're right. You're talking about cheerleaders, is you want your league opponents to do well, because that makes your resume a heck of a lot better.
Yeah, because then if Woodland, say Woodland and Ridgefield both win week 10 and are taking their resumes to the seating committee for the round of 16. You want, if you're Woodland's case, I think you have a great case in that you can say, look, our only 2 losses were in weeks 1 and 2 of the year. We were figuring out our quarterback situation. It wasn't until they got into league play that you really saw them hone that MO that worked so well on Friday night against Ridgefield, which is give the ball to Elijah Anderson, let one of the area's best players do his thing, and then hope that results in enough points for that defense to really clamp down and do its job, which is what they did. So I think if you're Woodland, you're making the argument that we are a team that is on the ascent and has been on the ascent. We didn't just win one league title, we've won 2 in a row now. So we're kind of a proven commodity at this point. And really, there's a good argument to be made that you just kind of throw those first 2 weeks out with the waste, because a coach will never say that, because they obviously learned a lot about what went well and what didn't go well those first 2 weeks that then jump-started their success. But you can say Woodland, that's a stock that's on the rise.
No, absolutely. And you look at those first 2 games, those losses against Kalama and Tilla Center, both playing this weekend in the Week 10 state preliminary round for Class 1A. But, you mentioned Elijah Anderson, and I think what's different about him this year as a senior is he's more of a complete football player. He was not projected to be the starting quarterback going into the season. Personnel changes had him taking over the reins full time. And when I saw them play in a 12-0 shutout of Washougal in Week 3 to open the league play, he had 37 carries for, I think it was about 193 yards, and just basically kind of in that wildcat formation, taking the direct snaps and waiting for the holes to open in front of him from the big boys. So now you're seeing him actually look like a quarterback. He's throwing the ball as well as anyone. He's completing passes as well as anyone, and he's attempting usually between 12 and 15 passes per game. So we really didn't see that early on in the year, and he is one of the reasons why they are where they are. And I know the all-league results have not come out yet, but it would not shock me at all if he repeats as the overall league MVP in the 2A GSHL.
So, we're just going to throw this out there. A team we haven't mentioned, but a team that has been playing better in the 2A, a team that has to go on the road in Week 10, who will be an underdog, but say Washougal goes on the road and wins an upset in Week 10.
Would not shock me either.
Yeah, where do they, with someone playing, we talk about Elijah Franco, he's been playing as good as anybody in the 2A Greater St. Helens League on both sides of the ball, but especially defense. The Panthers, if they go on the road and get the upset, obviously I think they're going to have a tough, they would have a tough round of 16 pairing. But I guess I'll just pose the question, could they do it? Could they win week 10?
Absolutely. I put nothing past Dave Hayek at all. What seed would they get? Probably you're looking at a 15 or a 16. They finished third in their league. Still a respectable overall record, but wouldn't shock me if they face Anacortes. Do I hate to say it, Tumwater? So, I mean, could they upset Olympic out of Bremerton? 100% they can. Elijah Franco, you mentioned it. It's, I mentioned about kind of where Elijah Anderson at Woodland has come. Elijah Franco was just mainly that cog defensively last year. Didn't take any offensive snaps, hardly at all, if I remember right. But now you look at the last 4 or 5 weeks, and he is a good reason offensively of why Washougal is where it was. And I mentioned when I saw them play in that week 3 loss, they were struggling offensively, and they've had a number of key injuries as well. And so to see Washougal where they are now, given maybe where they were a month ago, it's been a very pleasant surprise. So would not put it past the Panthers with the upset.
Yeah, a team that's playing its best football at the end of the season, and that's where everyone wants to get. We'll close with the 3As, and what I think is going to be a really interesting team to follow to see how far they make it, and that is the 3A Greater St. Helens League champion Evergreen Plainsmen, a team that enters Week 10 with an 8-1 record that won its first league title since 2007 and really has a strong body of work. They play Stanwood on here in Week 10, but if the Plainsmen take care of business and go into the round of 16, this is one of the more intriguing teams, I think, to see, because for years now, the 3A has just been loaded with juggernauts like Bellevue, like O'Day, like Eastside Catholic. It's only a matter of time before you run into one of those teams. Evergreen, if they get into the round of 16, where are you placing them, and what sort of challenges could they see awaiting them in a tough bracket of 16 in the 3A?
Yeah, you said it. It is a tough bracket. When you think Class 3A football in Washington, your first thought is not Greater St. Helens League 3A teams whatsoever. In fact, the last decade, there's only been 2 programs that have won a first-round state playoff game. That was Mountain View back in 2018 on their run to the state semis, and then Columbia River back in 2014, the league champions that year, won a round of 16 game, ultimately losing in the state quarterfinals. So traditionally, our teams in 3A down here don't have a great history of success when it comes to the round of 16. But should Evergreen take care of business Friday night against Stanwood, I see them probably in that 10 to 12 range. Wouldn't surprise me if they, say, get an 11 seed and maybe hit the road against a Lincoln of Tacoma, or even a Roosevelt of Seattle. And those 2 teams, there's a team east of them in Camas who played both of those teams and won both back in September. So I think what Christian Swain and his Plainsmen have done this year have been fantastic. It was
remarkable.
One of the projections that I made to start the season, that they would win the 3A GSHL for the first time in 17 years. And this is a team that I don't think it's going to be a one and done by any means. This is a team that is going to only continue to grow and continue to get better, and they will gain that respect and notoriety once they start having multiple league titles under their belt. So let's say they are an 11 seed this year. Hey, next year they might be the home team in that 8-9 game and only continue to climb from there. So it's just, I think this is really the starting point of what we're going to see for the next 2 years from Evergreen.
Well, Evergreen, everything they've accomplished this year and raising that banner they've done with a freshman quarterback. Jaden Baum, you forget he's just a freshman when you see him throw, because he's a kind of a bigger body kid with a cannon of an arm. But what I think you've seen is an excellent defense and an emerging deep play threat in Terrence Sarian, that he's only a junior, multiple Division I offers, including powers like Oregon and Washington. He's going to be back next year, and the Plainsmen, if they can, get that playoff resume, get that playoff experience, get that big game pressure experience, that's something that I think like you said, could really catapult that program into some really good things.
You mentioned the defense, and I think it can be really scary good at times. You look at just the last month of the season, 5 points to Shelton, a touchdown apiece in wins over Prairie and Heritage, and then that 20-zip shutout over Mountain View to end the regular season at McKenzie. This was kind of one of the staples, and Christian Swain talked about it before the season about how this might be the best defensive clan that he's had, not just in his tenure at Evergreen, but even back during his time when he was head coach of Roosevelt in Portland. So that says a lot to what this defense is and what this defense can be. And you know what? Once it gets to the postseason, anything can happen. So you get past Stanwood on Friday night and McKenzie, and they might get a lucky, favorable draw, even though they would be 9-1 record-wise. They might go up against a team that might have 2 or even 3 losses. So don't also be surprised if that happens. Just because the record's better doesn't mean they're going to get a better seed.
Well, what wins in the playoffs? Defense. What wins on the road? Defense.
Also defense, yes.
Yeah, so if that Plainsman defense can show out like they have so many times during the regular season, I wouldn't put anything past Evergreen about getting a little run put together in the round of 16. All right, well, gosh, we've covered a lot of ground, and that we do that because there's so much to talk about, because it is the football playoffs. Week 10, it's do or die, it's win or go home, and it's win and move on to the state playoffs proper. We're going to be all over the place Friday and Saturday. Obviously we got some other sports that we're going to be covering. I'm probably going to go over to the state cross country championships in Pasco. We have district volleyball happening, setting the stage for the state tournament for the 1As and the 2As the following weekend in Yakima. But there's nothing better than football when it comes to breaking down just the excitement of high school sports.
Especially playoff football.
Yes. So pick a game. If you have a team that you support, go out, support them this weekend. If you just love good football, pick any of these games we've talked about and go out and get yourself a hot cocoa or a coffee and watch some great action and support your community. We'll be out there. Be sure to follow 360preps.com on social media, or 360preps.com and all our social media, Instagram and X, and we will see you out at the field.